Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Are gray aliens actually synthetic? Are they trying to steal our souls? What are souls?
Hello, and welcome to the 980th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON, AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and that was Paul, and today we bring you a definitely a different show with some very interesting guests, with a lot of very interesting questions, and a few surprises in store. So if you have any comments, questions, or anything for us, you can call us from anywhere, 401-766-1240, that's from anywhere, or email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
And today we welcome a surprise guest co-host. Valerie LaFossa was with us in the studio. For you newbies, Valerie is definitely a high strangeness renaissance person. Empathic medium, UFO researcher and experiencer, author, lecturer. She is one of our occasional guest co-hosts, especially on open line shows. Welcome back, Valerie.
Thank you so much for having me, and I love that title, being a high strangeness renaissance person. I think that's probably my favorite title so far.
You can use that. I haven't copyrighted it.
Thank you. I will be stealing that.
Cool. All right, so coming to us via Skype today is Danielle Silverman, a UK-based researcher and editor. She worked for over 30 years alongside the late author Nigel Kerner, having collaborated on all three of his books. Dr. John Biggerstaff, also based in the UK, is a biologist who came to know Nigel Kerner's work over more than 40 years. Dr. Biggerstaff's work in science led him to believe that Nigel's theories are correct. Nigel translated in 2022. Our interview with him on CBS Radio from July 16, 2011, is available on the major podcast apps and in the archives at BehindTheParanormal.com.
So Daniel Silverman and John Biggerstaff, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Very happy to be here. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you with us. So I guess we'll just start right off. So tell us about Nigel Kerner and his work and conclusions. So Danielle, would you like to start us off?
Yes, so Nigel is the author of three books. Grey Aliens of the Harvesting of Souls was his second book. Sorry, first one, Song of the Greys, in 1998. Grey Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls in 2010. And Grey Aliens and Artificial Intelligence, his most recent book. And his whole investigation into the subject of the alien phenomenon began with a question that was asked by his then 12-year-old son, Dad, are UFOs real? And at the time, Nigel had very much a science background. He'd been trained as a medical student, and really he didn't have any belief in anything beyond the basically physical scientific phenomena that he saw around him. And he thought this was science fiction, basically. But because he always believed that with children, you should always give them the benefit of the doubt and give a good answer, not just dismiss what they say, he decided he'd look into it for his son, even though he did have a suspicion his son was just trying to test his dad out. Okay, but he thought, no, okay, I'm going to just look into this and find out if there's anything to this. So he did take a look into it, and in his own words, he said he was just turned upside down, back to front, and sideways by the whole thing, and absolutely astonished at the convincing evidence he found to say, yes, there is really something going on here. There really does seem to be a phenomenon that's experienced by multiple reliable witnesses, many of whom who would have no interest in concocting stories about what they've seen and experienced. And he began to ask the question, well, if they are here, what are they? Why are they here? What are they doing with us? And he found that question led him to a questioning of our entire, the reasons for our entire existence as human beings in the first place. And he connected, everything connected up across religion, philosophy, science, and he came up with an overall existential picture which would explain why the aliens are visiting us, why they're interested in us, and what their place is in existential terms with us, and what our place is in existential terms. So it became a very, very broad picture.
Okay, John, you want to pick up there and tell us about your
Yeah.
experience?
Well, over 40 years ago, I first met Nigel, and I was recommended by a friend who said, "You're talking the sort of stuff that my friend Nigel talks about." And then I went to meet him, and we just talked for days and days and days. And of course, we've been great friends ever since. And his theories really, and particularly with reference to this book, he's examined grey aliens, and almost uniquely has come up with the concept really that they're artificial intelligences, and that there is a fundamental difference. His question really was, why on earth would these beings with such advanced technology come and try to interact with us in the first place? What is it about us that could be of any use to them? And the conclusion that he came to after much research was that we are natural beings, we are living things, and that therefore the artificial intelligence systems really have no awareness and no ability to gain meaning from what they're discovering. And really the desire is to append onto that which we have, because they could see that we die, but the information field seems to return in new people as they're born, and so they follow these genetic lines like we would bacteria in a plate, for instance, when we're doing experiments. And so his conclusion, which really is a thread that runs through all of his books, is really the fact that we are natural and they are synthetic constructs made later after the universe has come about, that are really trying to, that are programmed really to append onto us and further their information field and their extent of control in the universe.
So, Valerie, do you have any thoughts or questions so far?
I have a lot of thoughts and questions.
Because Valerie is herself an experiencer. So.
Is that?
I'm an experiencer. I'm also a psychic medium, and I have encountered multiple kinds of ETs in a spiritual sense, similar to when I encounter a human soul. And I have encountered greys, and the message I consistently get from them is that humans misunderstand greys. They're constantly saying, you don't understand us, you're misnaming us, you're not getting what we're trying to say. So I'm wondering, humans tend to always look for somebody to blame. Are we just looking to blame our flaws on these beings because maybe we can? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, many philosophers and scientists have said that if any intelligent life were to visit our planet, the chances are it would be likely to be artificially intelligent. And we can see the extent of the technology that's from the UFO sightings that these visitors seem to have. They have an amazing extent of technology which we don't have, way beyond our capacity. So you can see, and Stephen Hawking and many other scientists have said, it's likely to be that if there's anything that is coming to us from another civilization and has the technology to do it, that they would have developed artificial intelligence in order to, at that stage, just as we are now, and they've just gone way beyond that and produced something with the kind of technology that is completely impossible for us to achieve now, but is going on the same trajectory that we're now entering into. Okay, so that's one reason why Nigel concluded that these were artificially intelligent, an artificially intelligent phenomenon, because that would be the logical trajectory for any society that has produced technology. that they would create something like that, as we can see from our own technologies. The other thing that led him to that conclusion was abductee reports of experimentation done by the Greys where painful procedures are carried out. And it would seem to be the case that the Greys looking on have no concept of human pain. They don't seem to have an understanding of emotion. And in David Jacobs' work, there's also several examples of abductees reporting the Greys studying human emotion as something they just can't understand and can't relate to. So those two things seem to suggest that this is not a sentient, conscious, natural living phenomenon that we're experiencing here. It's an artificially intelligent information field in a biological robotic form that's visiting us and has a fascination with what we have that it doesn't. So artificial intelligence would always be looking and spreading its network out into areas which it doesn't understand. That's the nature of artificial intelligence. And basically that's how Nigel understood the Greys' intentions, even not so much intentions. So it would be wrong to anthropomorphize them, he says, and see them as individual personalities with motivations, good or bad. It's just a program, basically, that they are programmed with, and they are looking to find out what they don't have within their program to expand that knowledge as far as they can possibly go and to survive as long as they can possibly survive, to keep that program coherent. Okay? And it's Nigel's, the kernel of Nigel's idea is that they found in us something that can somehow beat a universal law called the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, that breaks everything down into greater and greater states of chaos with time. So you leave a car out, it goes rusty. Our bodies rot and die. Okay, breakdown is a absolutely fundamental law of physics in the universe. But he said that he believes that they've detected in us, because we have something that's not of the physical universe, something that brings order and brings things together in the universe. And life, he believed, is a product of that field of order, which comes from before the Big Bang, before the physical universe. And we have souls and a line of connection back to that prior state of perfect union and order.
Well, you've started to get into this a little already, but you talk to 10 people and asking them what soul is, you'll get 10 different definitions probably. What did Nigel mean by soul?
Very, very interesting question. Yeah. So yes, obviously there's so many throughout the religions. There's so many definitions of what a soul is, and Nigel's definition of a soul was a line of connection from the initial point of perfection from which we have all emerged to the current point where we are now. So he believed in reincarnation, and that's what John was talking about when he said that the Greys detect that something comes into atoms and is born and goes out again. And they would only detect that as a physical imprint on the physical universe, which is made by the non-force, non-physical pen, if you like, of the soul writing on the universe with anti-force, if you like. Not so much anti-force, but non-force. Okay? So that's all they detect. So in order to understand and explain what Nigel believed a soul to be, we have to go back to what he believed the state from which souls came was. Okay? So his understanding was that what you might call God and what he called the God-verse, to avoid personification of what can't really be personified, is a state of absolute perfection and perfect union where there's no separation of parts at all. Okay, and there's perfect freedom and complete awareness of all things. Okay, within that perfection there would have to be and perfect freedom, the freedom to choose to no longer be perfectly free. Otherwise, by definition, it would not be perfectly free. Our universe is a manifestation of that freedom that must exist in the perfect freedom of the Godverse.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to ask Dr. John if he wants to jump in on this.
Well, if you imagine what Danielle's saying here as really the tautology of, if, for instance, if you have something, you must be able to define that there is nothing, and similarly the other way round. In the terms of Godhead, as Danielle is mentioning it, if you consider it to be a singularity, that singularity, which contains all of order, doesn't know anything about what disorder is, and therefore the singularity implies its opposite to be true, which means that if you have a pole of complete order or all-togetherness, there must also be a pole or an implied pole of entire chaos, where everything is completely separated into parts, which is the opposite of togetherness, and that the space, the difference, when you start to mix one with the other, all states where there is a mixture of one or the other together is what we call a universe. Now, into this universe comes the consciousness provided by the pole of order, but also the chaotic part, which is provided by this pole of chaos. And so at any point in the universe, you have a mixture of both. But where you have a predominance of consciousness is within the universe, and so is dead things, chaos, static dependencies, Nigel referred to them as. And therefore consciousness, which, in terms of the double slit experiment in quantum physics, really suggests that an observer is required that for matter to exist. In other words, consciousness preceded the Big Bang, which is consistent with these poles. Then consciousness itself has a line tracing itself back to every decision made in its partition from Godhead, and therefore it has a history, whereas the parts do not. They're actually the residual effect of just having all of that there. And so consciousness is able to manipulate matter in that sense and develop AIs. But the AI has no real understanding. It can't imbue it with understanding or meaning, because that actually comes from the pole of order. I hope that helps a little.
Okay, well, Ben looks like he's...
So basically what you're telling me is Greys are Aristotelians. That's because there's this idea that Plato basically had that was like, all right, well, you have the good, right? So there's this ideal existence, this overbeing that's part of the logos, the underlying order of the cosmos, right?
Yes.
Then Aristotle's like, no, that's not good enough. We have this thing called the gnosis noesis, which roughly translates to thought thinking itself, and it's perfection, right? So it's this being that's so perfect that it just constantly thinks itself into existence, right? And it can't understand anything without it, because once it stops thinking about itself, it just ceases to exist completely. So it can't bring itself down from sort of this cosmological hierarchy. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're basically saying that there's this idea of the gnosis noesis that's kind of going on, and the Greys are like, well, all right, we just kind of want to we want to find this line that goes back to this gnosis noesis. But the thing that's kind of losing me in the weeds here is, what kind of order are we talking about? What is, if when we talk about order, what do you mean?
Let's take entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, and over time it's predicted by astrobiologists or astronomers that the universe will eventually come to an end where matter no longer will exist. It will all break up into really just a sort of field of energy. There won't be any ability to direct heat from one place to another. The whole thing will be a uniform structure. If we look then backwards, we see that the universe is smaller because we know it's now expanding. And if we go back to its origin, we get back to the point where the Big Bang occurred, where the universe itself, in terms of size, was essentially came from a point or even nothing before the consciousness, and therefore the observer effect really is that this pole of order is outside of the universe, and so is this pole of chaos. And riding in between is the universe where we are, and it's people like us. So it's derivative. So souls are really just extensions of the observation of God, of separation, from the point of view of separation rather than the point of view of total order. And this is really what defines the boundaries of these three main systems. And so within the universe, the universe of parts, the atomic frame is used by those that are conscious really to simulate consciousness, but not to actually have any ability of that artificial intelligence. It's not able to actually discern what a natural living thing can.
Yeah, so the thing is, the only reason Nigel suggests that we have consciousness and are aware is because we have that connection back to something that's beyond the physical universe. We have a reference of stillness, of timelessness, by which we can be aware of the passage of time, which is what consciousness is. Okay, we can be aware of the passage of past, present, future. Because anything that's artificially intelligent does not have that connection back to that state of timelessness, it cannot have consciousness or awareness. And any notion that we can create artificially intelligent entities or creatures that can have consciousness is illusory, really, because it's absolutely impossible. So to see the Greys as malevolent or beneficent in a way, or benevolent, is really maybe misleading, because they're not motivated like we are. They don't have motivations because they don't have consciousness. All they're doing is following a program to expand their information as much as they possibly can, and to keep that information as coherent as possible and to exist for as long as possible. That's it.
Oh, Valerie's starting to sweat here. So.
Yeah.
Am I?
Oh,
Is it
sorry.
obvious? Yeah. No, I can't help. So I'm an empath. So emotions are at the forefront of my life, day in, day out, nonstop. And it's been a struggle for me when talking to people about ETs. It's always, they're highly evolved, they have no emotion. But I personally don't think a lack of emotion indicates anything being highly evolved. I think it's just the opposite. I think it's emotional intelligence. And the experiencers that I know that have encountered beings that have done experimentation and that sort of thing, they talk about them being scientists. And I know scientists have to put aside the fact that they have to cause pain. They know they're causing pain, but they have to put that aside for the greater good of whatever they're doing. And I'm kind of leaning more towards maybe something like that going on, that they have intelligence, they're aware, but they have a mission. And so they have to put that aside and hope for the best. I don't know if that resonates with the research at all, but that's where my thought
before you respond,
is.
why don't we take our mid-show break, and then we can proceed.
Is that time?
It is. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, and today Valerie LaFossa with us on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful but chilly Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our great guests in just a moment, so stay with us.
The Northern Rhode Island Council of the Arts invites you to its annual Mardi Gras celebrations, starting with the Queen's coronation and unmasking of King Jace on Sunday, February 12th at Savini's Pomodoro, followed by the Mardi Gras Ball on Saturday, February 18th at the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center. Visit the Northern Rhode Island Council of the Arts website at nrica.org for details.
Local and live at 99.5 FM.
Okay, and welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON Radio, AM and FM. And let's get back to our great guest. We have all the way from the UK today, Danielle Silverman and Dr. Dr. John Biggerstaff here. And we are going to take some listener questions. But why don't you respond first to Valerie's points that she made before the break?
John, you want to respond?
Yeah. Nigel's ideas about these greys being artificial intelligence and that artificial intelligence doesn't have emotion. It doesn't mean that you can't simulate emotion, but he also said that in a universe this big, there are lots of beings that are further along than us, that are natural living beings that have found ways in which to, perhaps hibernate or whatever, that long enough to actually be able to reach us from nearby stars, perhaps. And those, natural being with natural being is going to interact as people do. He considered, though, that the most dangerous thing was to subject oneself to really, programming like we're doing at the moment, and that programming, in terms of subducting our consciousness to a hive mentality, such as in the metaverse, etc., to actually subject ourselves to another level of reality within this level of reality. Was a deleterious thing, because you lose your ability to see that line back to your origin, and therefore you're forever trapped in this universal system where the second law of thermodynamics actually breaks down further and further your ability to express yourself within this system.
I'd just like to add there that I think you're absolutely right about emotional intelligence being and empathy being hugely superior to any kind, and that is evolvement.
Absolutely.
And that is what these visitors do not seem to have. They take people by force. There's no choice in the matter. And many abductees have experienced extremely traumatic things happening to them. And really, if you look at human doctors or human experimenters, when they deal with people, they're compassionate, they're caring, they try to control pain. They could control pain, I would imagine, with their technologies, but they don't. So as far as I can see, there isn't evidence of any sense of compassion or caring. There's an agenda of experimentation for sure, and there's definitely evidence that they're fascinated by what we are. But the other question you might want to ask is, if they are benevolent and if they are caring for us, why are they not sharing whatever technologies they have that could benefit our planet? Why are they keeping in the background? Why are they hiding when they could give us so much, if that were the case? So these are all questions that Nigel has asked. So, yeah.
That's certainly a pregnant question, but I think we'll have to leave it in favor of some questions from our first one, of course, from Peter in Bogota, Colombia. Peter Shelley, who was a guest co-host here as well now and then. Ben, if you would.
He is indeed, and he writes, what do you think is the scientific evidence that gray aliens are stealing souls?
And what do they do with them?
Okay, scientific evidence that grey aliens are stealing souls. Well, I don't know about scientific evidence, and we don't have very much scientific evidence anyway for the alien phenomenon. For some reason, it seems to elude objective confirmation and it can only be speculation as to why that continues to happen. But in terms of evidence that the Greys are stealing souls, many abductees, and I know Whitley Strieber is one of them, and many of the people who he's interviewed who have had similar experiences to him, they witness people who have died with the Greys when they're abducted, okay? So you could possibly say that that's a form of evidence. Also, near-death experiences. So most near-death experiences are very positive, and at least most reported near-death experiences are very positive and report a beautiful situation where there's a kind of most unbelievably unconditional love, and people feel it's so wonderful they don't want to come back. However, there are some near-death experiences which, instead of describing a situation like that, they describe meeting either the Grey aliens, or they describe what sounds like the inside of a spaceship. And I can just get you an extract from the book, which I have here, that's all about that. Okay, so Dr. Francis Ceravello, a family practitioner in Fort Lauderdale, said he was present when one of his patients coded 5 times in the ER. He'd known the man for many years, and he was a very calm, nice gentleman, as nice as you would ever want to meet. After he was revived, he told the doctor that he saw fire and little creatures about 4.5 feet tall all around him. He described them as bad-looking, terrible creatures, and he saw them every time he died. Another NDE experienced reported after undergoing bypass surgery that she found herself in an enormous silver great place, rather like a hangar for aeroplanes, but going on forever, and miles away there were some tiny figures. So there are people who at the point of death have a near-death experience, and they seem to witness what would seem to be something very similar to an abduction, and I can explain how abduction is actually very different to that, but this is what has happened to some people at the point of death. So that's 2 sources of possible evidence that the Greys might be in some way holding souls in a state close to them for some reason.
Ben, number 2.
Yes, indeed. There are. This is the second question. What did Kerner believe was the process to steal a soul, and what Greys specifically did with these stolen souls, which we kind of already talked a little bit about, but if you could expand on it, feel free.
Yes, sure. Okay, so what he said is that basically when you die, Nigel's idea of what happens to a soul at the point of death is very different to the general religious idea of, let's say, for example, in the Christian idea that St. Peter is standing at the pearly gates saying, good people, you go that way, bad people, you go that way, some kind of judgment, okay? He said you basically go to whatever resonant state that you naturally are, okay? So if in your nature, in your everyday life, with your actions and what you feel and what you do and the priorities you have in your life, you're somebody who prioritizes what's not of atoms, okay, which is everything that makes life in the world, so other people and everything that lives, because that comes from beyond the physical universe. So, and if you follow the precepts then of the great teachers, of Christ, of Buddha, and the great teachers of all the major religions, the original teachings, the central theme of all of that is basically love thy neighbor as thyself, care for people, and make that your priority. If you follow those priorities, you will go quite naturally to the place which are resonant, okay, straight into a state of what he called the space between atoms, okay, to a state of lesser force when you die, okay. If you do the opposite, if you focus on materiality, if you choose to make your priorities self-centered, if you choose to focus on targets and priorities in this universe, so status, money, fame, whatever it is, and that's your main focus, when you die, because you've chosen the physical world, you will be stuck in the physical world. And many ghosts have been seen by mediums to be doing the same action again and again. They'll maybe see somebody putting a a book on a shelf again and again, or stuck in a particular area. Okay, that's simply because they are focused in that state. They're caught, restricted. And Nigel said that for him, sin is restriction of the mind. Okay, so those souls who are caught on the edges of atoms, so to speak, and can't quite get into that the center of the space between atoms, where there's a pull from the Godverse towards states of greater union, rather than a pull of entropy into states of greater chaos, those souls are the ones who can be reached by the Greys. Okay, and they can use those souls to, Nigel described it as piggyback their programmed information, and to carry that into future lifetimes. So we are basically, the big irony is they can't actually reach our souls. They can't have anything to do with it because they're purely physical. They can't touch the non-physical, but they can program us with their information, and we can carry that information through our lifetimes. And in that way, they can get a semblance of eternality for that data field.
Anyone like to jump in here? Valerie or Ben?
Program how?
So what they can do is, because these souls are still caught in the force that's that's created at the edges of atoms, there's still some kind of force there. So that's why ghosts who are trapped still seem to have a physical semblance. They're still forming a skin, if you like, of force. Okay, they can use their technology both to intensify the force at the edges of atoms and hold them there, and just like microwave fields can be used to control rats and make them behave in a certain way, they can use their technology to affect the psychologies of those souls who are trapped with their information. They can also, and this is a little bit too complex to go into because it's a long story and requires a lot of information, which is explained in the book. But they can use those souls who are trapped to push into souls who are alive, who are connected to them, via a form of possession. And as soon as somebody is impinged on by a soul that's caught in this way, then and have what might be described as possession, their will is subjugated. So when their will is subjugated by another soul, then again the information field of the Greys can be telepathically imprinted on that person, because they're not in control of their own biological aerial, so to speak. And Nigel described the body as a biological aerial for the reception of the soul, which essentially comes from a non-physical state.
Valerie?
Well, I see a question here that I'm kind of curious about. If the Greys are these biomechanical creatures, as the evidence is suggesting, I don't think we've asked this question yet. Who made them?
Precisely.
Where did they come from?
Your fellow co-host Peter just wrote in with the same question.
Oh, good question, Peter.
Yeah. So who made the Greys?
Okay, that is a very good question. Do you want to start answering that, and I'll find the point in the book?
It really is. In any civilization that becomes increasingly technological, really, one could look at the nature of being in terms of, once upon a time we naturally had an awful lot of the properties that we are now using machines to perform, such as, there was more in the past. One could suppose that there was more telepathy within systems. If you have less physical being towards in the distant past, then communication would have been much more automatic between those. Now we use radio signals, etc. So we're using technology really to replace what the second law of thermodynamics is causing us to lose in terms of the efficiency of the properties of living things, really. And so as time goes on, we have the tendency to try to increase that, and therefore every civilization that uses technology in this way will eventually try to merge with it to increase its own physical being, because it starts to lose its ability to actually know where it came from. It can't see the line back either, and therefore there's a resonance between these information fields, and so human beings will start to act, or all living beings everywhere will start to create these things, so that when, and even now we're sending out probes into the universe with information, admittedly fairly crudely, to go and investigate the universe. And I think it's a natural tendency in any planet. And so Nigel was actually put this in his book, that, these greys, there's two possibilities here. One is that they're made somewhere else by a more advanced civilization and programmed to go and find out, to gain more knowledge in the universe. The other, which is sort of quite exciting in a way, is that information is present in the whole universe because of really, something akin to entanglement, that the nature of the universe itself propagates this effect, and such that, where you have resonant beings, such as an advancing civilization such as ours, this resonance comes about and allows, and really we make them, and they are in a way our future.
Well, why don't we take a moment and talk about the books, website, where people can find out more?
Sure. So Nigel's website is www.nigelkerner.com. His first book, Song of the Greys, that was published in 1998, is no longer in print, but it's available via the website. So we still have copies and can send them out to anyone who would like to buy them. His other two books are both in print. His newest book, of course, Grey Aliens and Artificial Intelligence, available from Amazon or any other bookstore, and physical bookstores too, and also Grey Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls, which is from 2010, and that's also still in print and available.
Yeah, I have it right here. Ben, you were...
Yes. So I think I'm starting to kind of understand what the whole deal is, and I think going back to the idea of control and technology is very interesting to me. There's a really interesting lesson that we can find all throughout human history, where the simpler life is, the better off the civilization is. Lao Tzu is probably a good example that comes to mind. His whole thing was, we're disconnected from nature, or, the world. And so by reconnecting with nature, we then go back to the idea, the ancient Chinese idea of heaven, this sort of overarching order of things.
Yes. And
you could even point to it in the Judeo-Christian perspective of the Book of Enoch, which is very underrated, because there's a very fascinating section in there where Enoch goes on and on about how these it's anglicized as angel, but that's really not the right word. We're going to use lowercase g gods, and say, they bring down technology and they give people technology, and it seems like a good thing, but it really isn't a good thing because we're just not mature enough to use it. But the idea of that comes to this idea that the Greeks had of techne, because there were different ways that we engage with knowledge. So there's techne, which is technical knowledge, episteme, which is scientific knowledge, doxa, which is the idea of public opinion, because you could have all the data points that you have from an analysis, but you use opinion to interpret them. Then there's this idea of nous, which is it's defined differently nowadays, but really it's kind of like spiritual knowledge is what it is. But this idea of techne is super interesting because it's the idea of how we use technology to control the world around us. And there's a dialogue between Socrates and Plato. I can never remember which one it is, but essentially they're talking about the Egyptian god Thoth, who brought writing to the Egyptians. And he goes to the he's like, oh, this is, Plato goes to Socrates and he's like, oh, isn't this so great? The Egyptians have writing, they can write down all their thoughts and whatever, and this is so wonderful. And Socrates goes, no, that's not good, because then they're going to forget everything. Because they wrote everything down, they're just going to lose the ability to remember. And one really important thing that I think we as a civilization have lost is this idea of how we view ourselves. And it's very important that we realize that we have all these abilities, even if it's just something as simple as remembering or seeing or walking. They're all powers through which we interact with the world around us. And so as we rely more and more on technology to get us around from place to place, do things for us, I can see the logical next step of us molding with the technology before, in front of us. I mean, but we've already been doing this throughout our entire existence as a species. A suit of armor is technology that we molded with in order to go to battle to fight other people. A car is a thing that we mold with in order to get from place to place. Our phones are a tether to everybody else around us. Arguably, you could say that it's a physical and sort of abstract representation of a collective unconscious, because we're communicating with each other sort of through these abstract constructs and symbols and such. It's like people's IQs are going down nowadays. I think very recently, as recently as 2019, there was a study done, I want to say it was in Norway, where the average IQ went down by they projected it was going to go down by half a point every year or so, because people don't think with logic, they think in abstracts now. So it's interesting to think of, the next logical step of artificial intelligence being a thing, being the next step that we would mold to it, but it's something we've already done. Because, what were idols, right? So the idea of an idol was to capture a being that was incorporeal and use it for our own ends. And we're trying to do that again. A buddy of mine works in cybersecurity, and he was telling me about a conference he attended via the internet, where they basically said, well, we're going to make a god, and that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to make an artificial intelligence that will be able to answer any problem and be able to basically deal with things morally and ethically. And there's a really fascinating scholar by the name of Dr. Paula Boddington, who is an ethicist. She's her whole thing is the ethics of AI. Very fascinating stuff. And really it comes down to understanding if AI have consciousness. And then taking a further step is, how do we know we're conscious? We can't really define if we're conscious or not. All I know is I'm sitting here in this chair, and even then, maybe I'm not. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of the Cartesian method. So really, the whole point of this diatribe is to kind of say, if the idea is to create technology with which to control the world around us, and if our souls are, for the lack of better, if we're going to go along this idea, if they're being commandeered in order to create a line of code that they're going to follow forever, right? If I'm following this correctly, feel free to stop me if I'm incorrect. If the idea is to progress their existence by stealing this spiritual thing and then turning it into code, I think the thing that I'm kind of getting stuck on is how can really it just seems like it's just a materialist answer to an ancient cosmology. Am I wrong?
You could say that. That's a very good way of putting it. And I think you make some really great points about technology there, and how the more we use technology for tasks that we once did with our minds, the more basically, and it's just really a principle of adaptation, we lose the capacities we once had. So what might seem like an evolution is actually possibly a devolution, because we're losing the facilities that we had before to be able to think for ourselves. So a child, for example, now will spend all his or her time with computer games, not using their creativity, not playing, not challenging themselves with physical challenges and so on. And gradually, kids are growing up like that and just losing the richness of the humanity that maybe their parents had before. So Nigel's point about all of that was that the longer we stick around in a physical universe, and he said we're in a physical universe because we're restricted, and we reincarnate until we either free ourselves of that restriction or we lose our ability to know, understand, and choose altogether. Okay, there's two ways there. The longer we stick around, the more trapped we become, the more we need technology. Okay, so it's inevitable, the technology. You can't do what the Luddites did and smash up the farm machinery because it's taking away their jobs. That's not going to work. You can't stop technology. But it's just a natural side effect of sticking around for a longer time in a physical universe until you get to the stage where the information field that you once were as a soul that was part of that perfect state and full of meaning, okay, is translated into a program where there's no meaning, just information. And that's the final state of what Nigel described as devolution that we are heading towards, which the Greys already represent and are trying to lead us towards in order that we can carry their programs into the future for them.
Well, we don't have time to discuss the time issues involved with classical reincarnation. However, I should point out that a researcher by the name of Josh Baczynski claims to have created the world's first self-aware AI prototype.
Well, how do you know that? That's the
Well,
thing.
I'm just
How do
saying
we
that's
know
what
we're aware?
Josh Baczynski
Exactly.
says. So I'm not saying he did, but he said he did.
Right.
Cassandra, who supposedly has emotions, things of this kind. So be that as it may, I just wanted to point that out. Valerie, we have about a minute, so
Okay. I mean, I think this is a great topic that, could be debated for hours and hours. I know
Yeah.
it's a topic of conversation that I've had in my circles for a long time, but I think what I'm taking out of this is actually hope, because in my work, I see that humans have this great quality that we have to do things the hard way, and that's how we learn. And so I think that is going to be our saving grace in all of this, based on everything I've heard today.
a nice positive note. Well, I think we're just about out of time. Give us your website one more time, please.
Yeah, it's www.nigelkerner.com. Do I have time for one comment?
Yes.
Sure.
Good comment. Okay, just one thing I'd like to say is something that Nigel said about abductees, right? Nigel believes that abductees were not the people who were catchable by the Greys, not the souls who are catchable by the Greys. They're souls who come into already genetically intercepted biological lines and resist the interception. They're too free. They're too different from this artificial program, and the Greys want to know why. And that's what abduction is all about. So I just thought I'd make that point because that's quite important to see the distinction there.
Well, thank you so much. Great discussion. You leave my bones rattling. And we'll be in touch off the air. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
It's been
indeed.
wonderful.
Okay, announcements, Ben?
Oh, yes, there are many announcements. A plethora, if you will. And currently, we're going to start with, you can look for us at the New England Parafest in Kittery, Maine on April 22nd and 23rd, 2023. And we will not kick off the event with a live show on April 6th, as we had hoped, because we have to do a rebroadcast on that date.
I have to break that news to Tom Spitaleri.
The poor man.
So anyway, we'll be at the Para Expo 2023 aboard the USS Salem at Quincy, Massachusetts, May 19th to 21st. We'll be among the speakers and we'll broadcast live from the ship, we hope, on Sunday, May 21st. Now, you're going to be at these events too,
Yeah,
aren't
I was there last year. That's a very interesting location for an
you?
event.
Yes, a decommissioned naval vessel.
We do love that.
Yeah.
And other events for 2023 for which we or I, and Valerie too, may be present, will be the Exeter UFO Festival in September. And she might not be at the Arizona Dowsers Conference in October, but
Never
who
know.
knows?
You can visit our show website, behindtheparanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008. from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, here on WOON, AM, and FM. You can also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and you can also find them on Spotify as well.
And our show has an app. It's free at BehindTheParanormal.com. There's a link right on the main page there. You can browse our books on that site as well, along with those of our guest co-hosts at our show website, again, BehindTheParanormal.com. You can find out more about the show, our many cases over the years, public appearances, and how to book us. The website also has a charity page, and we respectfully request that you check that out as well. Do what you can. We know all the people who run these charities, and we check them out very carefully. Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, USACares.org, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, and my favorite, Helping Haiti's Orphans, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund. Okay, what do we have for next week, Ben?
Well, we have on January 29th, we will welcome Dr. Richard Gallagher, a New York psychiatrist who works with the Roman Catholic exorcists and believes that we are way too untheological in our approach to parasites. Plan to get in or get your questions to us at paul@behindtheparanormal.com.
And we don't have time for our quote, which was from Nigel Kerner, but we'll use it next week. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Valerie, I stepped on your line.
No worries. And I'm Valerie LaFaso. Thank you for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.